Sup nerds, and welcome back to the Helpware Nerds podcast. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We've been doing that a lot lately, but this is definitely a little bit different, as it's not a review or just talking about fandoms in general. This is a couple of questions that I received from Nerds of the Roundtable and family members post Star Wars Day and ahead of the Mandalorian and Grogu coming out about Star Wars and the Star Wars fandom at large, and things that just kept propping up from different family members, different nerds of the round table around my thoughts. And I thought, why not just share it with you guys as a whole rather than just answering them in long text chains amongst the nerds of the round table? So that's what I'm doing here today. We're answering a couple of questions that I've been asked over the past couple of weeks, and hopefully you guys do enjoy that. Let me know down below if you want me to do it with other fandoms. But we'll start with Star Wars, as it's one of my all-time favorites, and it's piggybacking off of our last podcast episode and getting us all hyped for the release of Mandalorian and Grogu, which will be releasing next weekend at the time of this podcast episode. So, with that being said, let's get into it. So, the first question I got asked is, how would I watch Star Wars? Now, I know there are many ways that people over the years have come up to watch it. The most popular being the Machete Order, where you watch 4 and 5, and then watch 2 and 3 as a flashback, and then watch number 6, and then if you're inclined to watch 7, 8, and 9, and that would be how you would do that. But then you've got the way that Sam Witwer said to do it, where you would watch the Clone Wars and everything to do with that, so you get familiar with Anakin, so that when you get introduced to the big twist in the original trilogy, you feel more betrayed by the whole reveal, like, I suppose, like Luke does. And I feel like that does have emotional weight to it. And I would advise anyone that's coming into Star Wars to probably do it that way. I think that having that whole foundation of being familiar and loving Anakin as a hero, to then be told by Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope that Darth Vader murdered Anakin Skywalker, to then go on and find out, no, actually, Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker, that would feel way more impactful if you're coming into Star Wars for the first time. However, for me personally, someone that's grown up watching Star Wars with the prequels coming out, literally starting to come out around the time I was born, so I grew up watching the prequels first and then the original trilogy. So I tend to watch it in that order, specifically because that is how I grew up watching it. However, I do find the Machete Order really fun to do, especially because it allows us to still preserve the Darth Vader twist. Same with the watching the prequels, watching Clone Wars first without watching episode 3. As long as you don't watch episode 3, which is exactly what we're told you not to do, you still preserve that Darth Vader twist, and you need to preserve that Darth Vader twist, especially if you're watching it for the first time. The Darth Vader twist is the most pivotal thing for a newcomer to Star Wars to preserve. So if you can watch it in a way that you preserve episode 5's Darth Vader twist for a younger audience member or someone who's never seen Star Wars, then you're doing it right. I mean, the OG way to do it, watching it in theatrical release, will still do that, but I still think that means it can become overfacing. And it brings us to another question that I was asked, and that is whether Star Wars has become oversaturated. And the thing is, I think that, and I'm not going to solely blame it on this, but I do think that the MCU becoming so popular and having this massive connected universe spurred a lot of places, especially Disney, into wanting to do something similar with other projects that they owned. And now Star Wars has always been this big galaxy spanning thing, but it's always been this collective story. 6 films story of of the Skywalker family, from Anakin to Luke, of how the galaxy fell apart and everything. The Clone Wars was a nice little add-on to actually show what happened, because we got this time jump between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith from the beginning and the end of the war. Now they filled in that gap nicely with a kids cartoon, which had some very hard-hitting moments in it. Now what they've done is, I don't want to say MCUified, but kind of MCUified Star Wars a little bit by creating multiple different spin-offs and shows and everything. Yes, it's not just filling in gaps anymore. We are getting projects we didn't need, and or ask for. Now, I know Andor is one of the best Star Wars projects to come out as of late, and I know that I might get crucified in the comment section of this podcast episode for this. And I love season 1 of Andor. I think I've said it before that I found season 2 a little bit lackluster compared to season 1. However, Andor as a concept wasn't really necessary, because we didn't need the backstory of the random guy from Rogue One. Because while again, I like Rogue One, we didn't need the backstory of how we got the Death Star plans. We don't need a backstory for every throwaway line. Yes, we got told that we got the Death Star plans and it came at a great cost and things like that. But we didn't need the backstory for that. Yes, we got the banging Darth Vader fight. Yes, we got the whole Cassian Andor, the whole building of the Death Star. But we didn't need a full backstory for it. While I still enjoy that film, it it wasn't entirely necessary. And while we're on that thing as well, neither was Solo. And the fact that Solo didn't get a sequel has meant that Maul Shadow Lord is now having to lay the groundwork for his cameo at the end. And I do like that they're doing that, but the fact that they've had to give a show to explain things, while I'm not opposed to more Darth Maul is one of my favorite Sith Lords of all time, you've had to create another show to explain a movie that wasn't really necessary. We didn't need Han Solo's backstory. It would be, it's like when we got the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. I love the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Again, it's a really good show, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is my favorite Jedi. My dog is named after Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's how much I love Obi-Wan Kenobi. However, it wasn't entirely necessary to get a whole show about Obi-Wan Kenobi in exile, then having to leave to go save Leia. That was just a way to show Leia, and it kind of made things a little bit weirder, because it shows that Leia is a lot more force sensitive, and I think the Organas would have been a lot more on board with Obi-Wan secretly training Leia to be a Jedi than Lars was with Luke being trained. So the fact that they've done that kind of makes it a little bit weird that he chose to hide out and look after Luke the whole time. But that's by the by. It also shows that Leia was really force sensitive, and we don't get any of that in the original trilogy, but that's just my personal opinion or preference. You might think that I'm talking out of my backside with this and think that these films and shows were absolutely necessary, and that we definitely needed these to fill in these gaps. I just really don't think we did, and I think that while they were fun adaptations and fun things they definitely weren't necessary for Star Wars as a whole. Now, there are other areas where the show has been really, 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 really great, and has clearly been there to revitalize the series, but also fill in plot holes. And that's like The Mandalorian. And yes, we're getting a movie for that as well. But I think while some elements of The Mandalorian weren't necessary, I think it's done a good job at being its own thing. And that's the difference for me with with the other projects. The other projects were clearly there to fill in time gaps, and I know that Rebels and Clone Wars were also there to fill in time gaps, but they did something as well that Mandalorian did. While Mandalorian is also filling in gaps that we needed to know. So, like, how they got the Metachlorians to clone the Emperor, and we got that with the Bad Batch as well. We're getting this whole stuff, but we're getting it from a fresh perspective. Whereas in the Clone Wars, we kind of get that as well because we don't just follow our main cast, we follow other Jedi, we follow Anakin getting a Padawan, which helps showcase his fall to the dark side in a different way. We also get this whole toxicity between him and Padme throughout that show as well. We follow the clones and we get to relate to them. So it adds new elements. Whereas I don't really think Rogue One, Solo, and anything added much to the story that we needed adding to the story. Now, again, this is solely my opinion. And there are definitely shows that really didn't need to be in Star Wars at all. And I'm looking at you, Skeleton Crew, and I'm looking at you, Book of Boba Fett. Now, I'm not going to dive into my full thoughts on the Book of Boba Fett. We've done a whole deep dive on the Book of Boba Fett for Star Wars Day last year, so go check that out if you haven't already. That will tell you what I thought of the Book of Boba Fett back then. But with that, I really do think that actually made Boba Fett's character worse. And I think they should have stuck with what they had for Boba Fett rather than what they cooked up. And with Skeleton Crew, they did Treasure Planet Star Wars Edition, and it wasn't a bad project. It just wasn't needed for Star Wars. Again, in these are solely my opinion, and solely based on my own biases and opinions. Now, one thing that I do think was left off the list, and most people would assume I would put on this list, is the Acolyte. I will not put the Acolyte on this list. Well, it's not over-grandized and everything. I I put it in the same vein as The Mandalorian. While it is not exactly necessary for the full-on story, it's its own thing, and it does things that I think are very clever. Yes, a lot of the fandom didn't take to it, and I think that's a shame because, in my opinion, it doesn't take away from anything from canon, doesn't change anything about Anakin Skywalker's story. It actually elevates it a little bit, especially with the Plagueis reveal at the end of the show. We have the whole Sith reveal, sort of, because he never outright says he's a Sith. He says the Jedi would call him a Sith, and anyone that heard him say that is dead. So the fact that, or on his team, or had their memory erased, all of that solidified. It also cements the Jedi's hubris, that they believe that no one other than a fallen Jedi could really be responsible for this. They don't consider Sith at all. They're still so adamant that they've already took care of the Sith that they don't even consider them a possible threat anymore, which cements back into episode 1, where they're having that whole discussion, and they're like, the Sith have been gone for ages, and Yoda's like, hang on a minute, clouded is the dark side, so maybe Qui-Gon's telling the truth here, and it turned out he was. And then they have that whole spiel of master and apprentice, but which one was killed, with Mace Windu at Qui-Gon's funeral. So the it does start to showcase the thing, and I do. While I don't think the quality is quite on Mandalorian's level, I do put it in the same bracket as not I wouldn't class it as necessary, but I would class it as being its own thing. So it branches off, and while it can connect back, like the Mandalorian does through the Luke arc and the cloning stuff, it doesn't impact the story in a way that would ruin Star Wars, like a lot of people tend to claim on the internet. And I'm sorry if that means that a lot of people will disagree with me on that, but that is my hot take for this. I do personally think that a lot of this gets inflated massively and big dope, specifically because the Acolyte is so popular, hated, and people just like to jump on bandwagons. And because people like to jump on bandwagons, it just grows even bigger. And there wasn't actually that much wrong with the Acolyte. Yes, did it need a couple of rewrites? Yeah, it probably did. Were there some things that could have been cut on the cutting room floor? Yeah, but were there some gripes that were just plain misleading and wrong? 100%. The biggest one that I see all the time is the bleeding of the lightsaber. Everybody complains about how OSHA bleeds the lightsaber, but no one complains about how the lightsaber is bled in the Star Wars games with Cal Kestis and everything. I forget the name of the guy who bleeds the lightsaber in the Fallen Order games, but you know who I mean. And the thing is, he's not even touching the crystal. Her bare skin is on the crystal. And so you see what I'm saying? Yeah, I've kind of woke up a Joe's violence with this one. So, hey ho. Uh, I just it's something that I had to get off my chest a little bit. But those are the two big questions that I got asked. With a little bit of my questions on the Acolyte, someone asked me about that. Now, this was a question posed by my little brother the other day, and they asked me, is it okay to dislike the Jedi as much as you dislike the Sith? And my honest opinion is yes, it is, because of the fact that everything that goes wrong from the prequel trilogy is all because the Jedi were too blind and too arrogant to see that they could be in the wrong. And the thing is that their dogmatic view of how the Force is seen is what ultimately led to the fall of Anakin Skywalker and the rise of the Emperor and the Empire. Luke outright says it in the sequels, love or hate the sequels, if you will, but what that speech that Luke gives about the hubris of the Jedi and the rise and fall of the Jedi is 100% true, and you can't argue that. And the fact is, it's that that leads to the end of the Jedi Order at the height of its power, and the Great Purge by the Emperor and the stormtroopers or clone troopers, but and everything like that, and the march on the temple with the 501st. So everything that you see there is on them, and if you look at the objectively, you can say that while they're not as evil as the Sith, they are as culpable in the suffering that the galaxy eventually goes through in the time of the Empire. And it is all because they were too blind to see what was right under their nose, especially allowing Palpatine so much access to their supposed chosen one. I do firmly believe had Qui-Gon survived Naboo, that would not have been allowed. However, Obi-Wan was too inexperienced and too trusting in the council to and thus allowed that to happen. So, hey ho, there's nothing that can be done. It happened, and the Emperor rose to prominence and power, and the Emperor and Empire spread its influence across the galaxy, and everyone was crushed under heel until a Skywalker saved the day. So yeah, I think that the Jedi can be as disliked as the Sith, And I do think that it's someone with great media literacy, in my opinion, that sees it as both sides of the argument, really. And I think the main thing that you'll have seen on this channel as of late is that I'm a big firm believer that Star Wars is better in animation than it is in live action. At least lately, I feel like the original trilogy is one of the best things to come out in live action. However, from that point onwards, even the prequels, which I'm not a prequel hater, I love the prequels. The sequels definitely needed some rewrites and a lot of work. I don't think they're as bad in some areas as a lot of people say. I actually liked The Force Awakens, and I liked uh, elements from the second sequel. Rise of Skywalker needed a lot of rewrites to fix what was going wrong with there. Like, they should have outright tried to explain rather than hand wave Palpatine's return. Although there are legends explanations for Palpatine's return, so it doesn't break established legends canon. So they were pulling from things that happened, but there does need to be background, and I do feel like they've been doing damage control ever since. However, I do think that animated projects are better since Disney took over, especially the last season of Clone Wars, The Bad Batch, Maul's Shadow Lord, Tales from the Underworld, Tales from the Sith, Tales from the Jedi. They've all been really good. Rebels. I really do enjoy all of their animated projects. Whereas their live action, and I've said it a few times, has been hit or miss depending on what your tastes are or whether the fandom actually gravitates towards it. And I do really, really think that sometimes they've relied on a bit too much nostalgia bait. And I am looking at Ahsoka here. Now, and the main reason I'm looking at Ahsoka for this is because Ahsoka is one of those shows that's really good. However, you need to have seen quite a bit of the animated projects to actually understand what's going off. If you haven't seen Rebels, then the whole Thrawn going to the other galaxy makes no sense. The whole Mortis God stuff makes no sense. Ahsoka herself, a character introduced in animation, you have no idea who she is. Just coming into Star Wars as a layperson, someone who doesn't really know anything outside of the movies, you're gonna click on this and go, who is this person? You won't know who they're talking about unless you've seen Clone Wars, Rebels, and then you can watch Ahsoka. There shouldn't be a show where you have to do homework. And I feel like that is becoming the norm for Star Wars. Like going to watch Mandalorian and Grogu this weekend coming, my partner isn't as big on Star Wars as I am, so we're gonna have to sit down and watch The Mandalorian, or at least the last season, so that she has a basic understanding of where we're at with Mando and Grogu before we go and see this film, because she's not going to understand who these characters are or where they are in their story until we get there. Now, yes, I get that you can go into a movie blind, but sometimes that doesn't really work when they're established characters. It worked for like A New Hope when that first came out because these weren't established characters and you were establishing them through the movie. Same with the sequels, while it was a miss on the later ones. I think Force Awakens did a decent enough job in establishing who the characters were, and then it fumbled later on. And then you have the prequels. We'd heard about who Anakin and Obi-Wan used to be, and they did a good job at establishing who they were back in the Clone Wars. Coming into Mandalorian and Grogu, these characters are established in a TV show, and you're going to have to try and re-establish them in the movie for anyone that hasn't watched the show and just watches Star Wars movies. And I think that's going to be a tall order. So I do feel like this is going to be one of those where you have to kind of do homework. And I do think that Disney is falling into the you have to do homework trap. And it's not just Star Wars. MCU is doing it a lot. I think the DCU is going to end up falling into that because they're having a lot of TV shows connect to their universe. So I do think that this is going to be a problem going forward for many, many universes with TV shows and movies, where you're going to have to have watched the show to actually understand what's going off in the movie. But I suppose that's just the way of the world now, and there's nothing really we can do about it unless we just talk about it like this. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree with me that doing homework for a movie is a bad idea, and let me know how you would watch Star Wars had you come up with your own idea. I personally stick with the Machete Order. It's my favorite way to watch Star Wars, and I do kind of miss out the miscellaneous TV shows and stuff like that. Otherwise, you can't fit it in on May the 4th. And I do like to watch it all on May the 4th and May the 5th if I'm feeling like watching the sequels. But that's usually not the case. But with that being said, I'm going to call this video to an end. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and most of all, stay nerdy. May the Force be with you.